Systems and usable security. Today we'll have an introductory session, introduction to computer security. The prerequisites for this course are having the knowledge of computer networks and operating systems is required, and if you have used Linux operating system anytime, that will be an advantage. Knowing some kind of scripting language like either Perl or shell scripting, or maybe Python also may be usable. The content of this course are divided into 4 parts. In the first part, we'll see the security issues from where they originate and the difference between the vulnerabilities and exploit and attacks. What are these? And then in the second part, we'll study the operating system security. So operating system security, what are all the safeguards that operating system provides, their security mechanisms which are inbuilt, those aspects we'll see. In the third part, we'll see touch upon the web security. If I develop a web application, then what are the security issues that can appear there and how do we fix them? And then in the last part, we'll see the security aspect from the usability perspective. That's roughly the content of this course. So we'll start with asking a basic question: why should we study computer security, or in general the network security? So in this diagram, let's see there are I've shown 2 users with the blue color one. So if let's call them as A and B. A is this guy and B is this guy, and A wants to transfer some money, maybe 1 million rupees to B. He is initiating a transaction. So if that happens, so a transaction from A to B, or you can think of even a file transfer between A and B. So in the network, this file can move and then it reaches B. So this is a valid transaction, but the movement of this file is valid in the sense. But what can happen is, in the network, because this file is transferred over the network, there are a lot of intermediate nodes and maybe the routers, switches, other kind of computers which are connected to that network. So some of the intermediate nodes might do something mischievous things. So a simple thing could be, so if let's say A transfers this file or a transaction with 1 million rupees from A to B, the file can, instead of going to user B, it can come to an intermediary which we maybe call it as C. And what C can do is he can transfer another file which is with him or her to B, as if the file has come from A. If the user B does not know the C has transferred his file in the name of the A, then he might think that 2 million rupees have been transferred from A to B. So this is not a valid transaction in the next. So similar kind of things can happen in the network. So maybe A in the first place may not have transferred anything, but having the knowledge of A is connected to the network and B is also connected to the network, the intermediate node C might fabricate something and then transfer a file to B as if it has been transferred from A. So this is actually not a situation. So such kind of, these are the kind of the security vulnerabilities that are possible in the network, in the computers. So that is why we want to understand what are the possible security vulnerability that originate, and also how do we, if there are vulnerabilities, how do we fix them. And for that, we devise some of the security safeguards or preventive mechanisms or solutions. So then we'll understand, if I come up with a solution, how the user is going to make use of them, how usable that solution is, how intuitive that solution is. Those aspects will be the usability aspects. So let's start it. Again, we will ask the basic question: what is the computer security? When do we say system is secure? What is security means in the context of the computers or the networks? So to answer that question, what we do is the computer, whatever we use, computer means it's in generic term, any device including your mobile phone or at the highest end the supercomputers, all of them are computers. The computer security is all about dealing with the protecting the resources, computing resources. There are some resources in the computer. So what are those resources? There are three kinds of resources. One is the memory. Every computer has got some sort of the memory, and we are talking about protecting that memory. And the second is computing power. Every computer has got the CPU machine power. And then of course the third component, which is the data. Those are all my resources. So I want to protect. If I am coming up with the protection mechanism, I want to protect these three resources. The quantum of the resources, memory, computing power can vary from device to device, and the amount of data and how critical the data may also vary. But in general, these three resources are there, and we want to have some kind of the safeguard mechanisms for the protecting these kind of the resources. Now the next question is, against what we want to do the protection. There are three things that can happen. So these are all computing devices or electronic equipment. So there can be some kind of the errors introduced by natural phenomena. Other thing is, humans as the users of that system, we can also do some mistakes while using any kind of the software or any application. So we want to have protection against such kind of the errors. And second kind of protection required is, there are some bad guys outside. There are attackers, hackers sitting outside the work. They might launch the attack against your applications and systems. We want to have security mechanisms against these bad people. And the third is, there might be people who are within the organization. Maybe if let's say an organization is there and there are a lot of users within that. So maybe let's take companies like software companies and things. So there will be some employees who are dishonest, and they might having the knowledge of how the systems work and what are the applications that are used. They might do something maybe at the time when they leave the company, or if they are fired, that time they can do. So we want to have protection against these people as well. So in nutshell, computer security is all about protecting the resources in the computer, and the resources are memory, computing power and data, and protection is required against these three kind of the attacks and the vulnerabilities, and also the natural phenomena. So next fundamental question that we ask is, when do we actually say system is secure? In order to answer this question, any computer that we have, a computing device, using that we want to do some useful work. We want to run some applications in that computer. So we write different applications and programs to do such kind of the computations. So we say that all these programs take some form of the input and usually generate some output. Any application that you can generate, that is the generic framework. And we say that a system or program or application is secure if it possesses the following two properties. What are those? One is, for an expected input supplied with some good intent, some user is giving some input. For that input, if the program or application does not fail and if it generates the right output. So for the right output input, it should generate the right output. and for any unexpected or unintended input supplied with some malicious intent, the program does not fail or the application does not fail. If these two conditions are met, then the application or system is said to be secure. So this is actually very generic definition. So application can be as complex as you can think of. So any banking application, anything that you can think of, or it can be as simple as a program written for adding the two numbers. So when these two conditions are met, then the system is said to be secure. So this includes even the operating system as well. Operating system is also a program. So if the operating system also does not fail, and if it works properly when some right input signal are given, so then the system is said to be secure. The next question that we ask is why we should care about security. So this probably many of us know the answers, but nevertheless, for the sake of completeness, we will try to understand why we should care about the security. So this is nowadays with the internet available in the handheld devices, we do use internet for many things. For example, online banking, shopping, we will book tickets online, reservations, and we also store our personal files, photos, other things in our computer. We don't want someone else to access these things without our knowledge. That's why we care about the security. And the other thing would be if your system is compromised, it might become too slow in response. So, or else you might be contributing to the attack without your knowledge. Your computer itself might be part of some other cyber crime, and you will, if you don't take enough precautions, then you might be in trouble. And every time something happens, big credit card details are compromised, the user details are compromised, such news come in the media. So such negative coverage in the media damage the reputation and credibility of the companies and also the individuals who are managing them. So we do want to have protection mechanism to avoid such negative coverage in the media. And as I said, you may also be contributing to the cyber crime without your knowledge. So in the subsequent classes, we will see is like the botnets, and in the background, some software you might be sitting in your computer, and then that might be part of some global network, and then generating under the instruction of someone else, it might be generating some traffic. If that happens, you might face some legal issues. So if I own a computer, it is also my responsibility to protect it so that it does not, knowingly or unknowingly, my computer is not involved in such cyber incidents. That is why we care about cyber security. So next question, if cyber security or vulnerability exist, then who are actually vulnerable to such kind of the cyber attacks? So of course, the most attractive or the lucrative targets are the financial institutions, because there is money involved. If I can compromise a banking system, I may get some undue advantage. I may get some financial gains. So that is why we care about the cyber attacks. And then the defense organization, maybe the enemy countries might want to know what kind of the systems our defense organizations use. So that is another lucrative arena where such organizations become the targets. And then the government agencies, pharmaceutical companies, IT companies, all of them own some or the other format of the intellectual properties. So they also become the target of the cyber attacks. And even the academic institutions. So tomorrow, let's say if we come up with some new invention or this one, so if we have such confidential material, So if somebody, we store all the data and other things in our computers. So if our computers are targeted, that is also an issue. So we also, academic institutions will also become target of the cyber attacks. So in a nutshell, these are some of the things, some just to give example, but in general, everyone who is connected to the internet are vulnerable to such kind of the cyber attacks. So having said so what it means is, if I am trying to protect the infrastructure, everybody who is connected to the internet need to have some form of the protection. Cyber security is studied under three commonly used terminology, which is called as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are also called as an acronym CIA principles. So C stands for confidentiality, I stands for integrity, and A stands for availability. So what are these? Confidentiality means that the data that is there is protected from unauthorized users. So the data is also one of the resources. Remember, if you can recollect. So we said that data is one of the resource. So confidentially means that the data is not going into the wrong hands. And the integrity means that the data which is stored on the computer is not manipulated by some unauthorized users, are not altered during this could be while in the storage or when we transfer the data over the network. If you recollect the first diagram that we showed, the file was actually moving from the user A to B. During that transmission, someone sitting in the middle who you see is actually either accessing the file or he is fabricating some data and then generating to the targets. Those are all the things. So that is a compromise of the integrity. So we don't want such things to happen. And the third is the availability. Availability means that the right information is available to right set of people at right time. So if these three conditions, if confidentiality is maintained, integrity is maintained, and availability is there, then we say that roughly comes to that the system is secure, either at the time of transmission or during when the data is stored in the work. So let's take a look at each of these things in little more details. If I want to protect data manipulation by unauthorized user, how do we do that? If we want to prevent unauthorized access, then how do we do that? If I want to provide the availability of the data, then how do we do that? So confidentiality, as I said, it need to do two things. One is it should provide access to the legitimate users who are actually the owners of that data. They should be having the access to the data. And then second thing is those users, unauthorized users who do not possess a valid access to the data, they should be blocked. If these two conditions are maintained or satisfied, then we say that the confidentiality of the data is maintained. Now, this is very simple. So you give access to the legitimate users and then block access to the illegitimate users. So, but now in question, how do we actually achieve this? In practice, how do we actually make this happen? So confidentiality can be achieved through a bunch of techniques. One is a technique called as the encryption. So what does encryption do? So if I have some data, let's say I have ABC as my data, maybe think of this stored in a file. Let me call that file as F. And what I do is I give this file as input to a function or the algorithm, and think of this, we call it as the encryption algorithm. And then this data is transferred to some other format. Maybe ABC now becomes XYG. So ABC is an useful information. When I do the encryption, of course, maybe you can also supply a key. Let's call that as a key. So taking this key key K as input and the ABC, which is the data as input, it generates some output that is XYZ. So this XYZ, if somebody reads that data, it is not meaningful. So so let's say this file has got the details of the salaries of some employees, and when I don't want to disclose who is drawing how much of the salary, so what I can do is I can encrypt that file and then store it on the disk. So if somebody access this file, let's call this file encrypted file as fhat. So if somebody accesses that fhat, then he is not able to make out what exactly this XYZ means. So the encryption turns the data useful human readable content into some random content. When you reverse that, that is called the decryption. You will get back the original data which the legitimate users can access. I can put some kind of the access control mechanism. So access control means that I control who can access what. So let's say in an organization there are a lot of people, and every user has got the CEO in an organization might be having access to maybe every piece of information within the organization. Okay, a normal user, maybe a programmer, may be having access to the only the data related to the project on which he or she is working, and some other employees might be having access to some other data. So by providing or restricting the or controlling the access to the resource here in this case is the data, I can achieve the confidentiality. So the programmer need not have access to the same set of details as the CEO. So I can define what exactly the programmer is supposed to access and what are the projects he is working on, and with which I can provide the confidentiality of the data. And the third technique that you can use is something called as the authentication. So authentication determines the identity of the person who is claiming the access. So he accesses here in this case again the data. So the access is again determined by identifying the identity of the person who is claiming that or claiming that access. So how do we actually do this? So this is done with three things which are commonly used. One is called something the person has got. So for example, if the authentication can be done using a secure ID device. So maybe another useful example might be if you have used anytime two-factor authentication for Gmail and there is an app that comes. So there is a number that generates. If you link your account with that device, then every time you want to log in, you can take that number and input. That's an example of something person has got. That authenticates the user. Okay, so the person X is trying to log into the account. So email, the data that is stored in that email account is the resource. So he is claiming access to that resource. By providing this piece of information, he is confirming that he is indeed the person who is supposed to get the access. And the second method with which the authentication can be provided is something the person knows. So passwords are the best examples. So even going back to the same example, if some user is trying to log into user email account, he is supposed to enter the passwords. So that's the example of something the person knows. And the third technique of authentication is something the person, he or she is. So maybe the biometric data, thumb impression that we use, that's an example of something the person has. Using all of these mechanisms by encrypting the data, providing the right access control and the authentication of the data, I can actually provide the confidentiality, achieve the confidentiality of the data. So now in addition to that, there is a concept called the authorization. Authorization determines who is supposed to access what kind of the data. When the identity of the user is established, then whether he or she is allowed to access that data or not, you can do it. So some authorization mechanisms are also you can have to provide the confidentiality. So these are all technical means. In addition to that, You can also have some kind of the physical security mechanism. So for example, I don't want the physical damage to the server on which the secret, the data, the file itself is stored. So how do we actually provide such kind of security? So if that is compromised, then your confidentiality will also be not there. So if there is a physical access, if somebody has got physical access to your hard drive, they can copy that data to another hard drive, and then also your confidentiality is compromised. So in order to avoid such situations, you also need to have some kind of physical security mechanisms.